an evangelism conference for New Zealand. Get inspired, be equipped. Engage Conference, reaching your world one conversation at a time.
What do you think the biggest problem is facing the church today? There's going to be a lot of answers, but give me some examples. What do you think is the biggest problem facing the church today? Apathy, yeah. Evolution, yeah. Any other takers? There's obviously, there's all sorts of things that you could come up with, but for me, I think it's this statistic that 60 to 75% of Christian youth will walk away from their faith after they leave the safety of their home, our youth group and church. Despite the best intentions of our pastors, our youth leaders, of parents wanting to keep our children safe. So, let's let this sink in for a moment. I want you to imagine if I went into your church and I randomly picked 10 children out of your youth program, brought them in and lined them up at the front, and I said, okay, church, I want you guys to choose which 6 of these kids are going to walk away from their faith and which 4 are going to stay. Now, obviously, we don't get to choose, but the outcome is the same. A choice will be made, and 6 out of 10 of those kids are going to walk away, potentially, statistically speaking. Now, I think this is just totally unacceptable. I think the church has to do something differently here. We have to ask ourselves why. Why do so many young people walk away? And lots of reasons are given. First and foremost, of course, we have to acknowledge that it is a sin issue, ultimately. That is why people turn from God. That is why people turn away. It's a sin issue. And that is something that is particularly difficult for our young people because of the permissive culture that we live in. So the first contributing factor is really a highly permissive and relativistic moral culture. A culture that says you decide what's right and wrong, and not only do you get to decide, but if you actually want to live a good moral life, you will be ridiculed for that. So kids who make a stand against the promiscuity and the drug use and the drunkenness and the parties, they are going to get ridiculed. So that's the first thing. In fact, one university student said, I didn't even know it was possible to attend university and not drink. So this is what they're facing. So the second reason, and this is, of course is oversimplifying it, but it's really that they're incredibly inarticulate about what they believe, about their faith. They don't own their own faith. They've never had to articulate and express what it is that they believe is true. And so when they go out into our hostile culture, they've never practiced defending their faith against the attacks that will inevitably come. And they come from a highly secular and aggressive culture. And so when you mix these 3 things together, a permissive, relativistic culture, young people who are inarticulate and unable to express what they believe, and then they go out into a culture that's actually very, very hostile to what we believe. The result, of course, is that they walk away, or many of them will. Now, there's other reasons that are quoted when you actually survey these young people and say, why did you walk away? There's lots of different reasons. They claim hypocrisy in the church, right? And this is something that we all need to be aware of. They see people claiming to live one way and then actually acting out in a different way, a different standard. They don't like the fact that the exclusivity of the Christian worldview is that Christ is the only one who saves. And they don't like that. They want to think that there's lots of different paths to God. Some see Christianity as anti-science. And that's an absolute tragedy because science was birthed from a Christian worldview. Some see Christianity as behind the times when it comes to moral claims and sexuality and things like this. But the most common reason given, when you actually survey these young people, the most common reason is some intellectual challenge or some doubt that wasn't being answered within the church. Something that an intellectual challenge the church didn't prepare them for. Their doubts weren't taken seriously and their questions weren't being welcomed. And so they end up saying things like this: it just didn't make sense anymore. Some stuff is too far-fetched for me to believe. I think scientifically there's no real proof. Too many questions that can't be answered. I couldn't believe in both science and God, so that was it. I didn't believe in God anymore. So these are examples of intellectual challenges that they felt weren't being answered by the church, and these are the excuses used. And of course the hostility towards Christianity is growing. Let's have a look at some of these quotes from some famous authors that are out there. So good old Richard Dawkins. Religion is capable of driving people to such dangerous folly that faith seems to me to qualify as a kind of mental illness. We are mentally ill. That's what the world thinks. How about this one, again from Dawkins? Faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. These are the ideas that are out there. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher. He says, the kindly God who lovingly fashioned each and every one of us and sprinkled the sky with shining stars for our delight, that God is, like Santa Claus, a myth of childhood and not anything a sane, undiluted adult could literally believe in. Or this guy, Sam Harris. If I could wave a magic wand and get rid of either rape or religion, I would not hesitate to get rid of religion. Pretty extreme, eh? And that's not the worst. Here's my favourite. This is from Richard Dawkins. Regarding the accusations of sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests, deplorable and disgusting as those abuses are, they are not as harmful to the children as the grievous mental harm in bringing up the child Catholic in the first place. Think about what he's saying. What he's saying is that for us to raise our children to believe in God is more harmful than sexually abusing them. Now keep in mind, this is not some backwater internet troll. This is a best-selling author. This man's book, The God Delusion, sold 8.5 million copies. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 51 weeks, and it's been translated into 34 languages. These are best-selling authors that are peddling these ideas. Christianity is under attack, and when this attack comes on our young people after they've left the safety of our home and our youth group, they have to be prepared. We have to better prepare our children. How about these, just some examples, bringing it a little bit closer to home. These were put up in Auckland a few years back by the Humanist Rationalist Society. We're all atheists about most gods. Some of us just go one God further. There's probably no God, and stop worrying and enjoy your life. This one, good without God, over 1 million Kiwis are. It's based on census data, where 1 million Kiwis self-identified as non-religious. In the beginning, man created God. Now, again, these billboards aren't cheap. These are expensive. There's serious money going into this attack. This isn't just ideas over a beer in the pub. People are being organised about attacking the things, the values that we hold dear.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Do you need to use that mic? Because it's quite loud.
Yeah?
I don't know if the others are funny, but
It's a bit echoey? Yeah, I was thinking that. I just thought it was me. You want to just mute it and then see if they can hear? Yeah? All right. Okay, so are our students prepared? Is that all right? I don't want you guys straining. Maybe just a little bit. Yeah. Are our students prepared for the hostility that they're going to face when they get onto the university campus? Because I think in the Western world anyway, obviously there are more hostile environments out there, but in the West, the most hostile place for Christians is the university campus. And the ideas that are out there and the way that the Christian worldview and Christian values are ridiculed and attacked is just so intense on university campus. Here's some quotes from an atheist professor who's quite open about his desire to destroy the faith of our young people, Daniel Dennett. They will see me as just another liberal professor trying to cajole them out of some of their convictions, and they are dead right about that. That is what I am, and that is exactly what I'm trying to do. He's quite open about it, about his desire to attack and ridicule the Christian faith. So will your kids' first exposure to some of these ideas be on the university campus, where they're not prepared, where they haven't come across these ideas before? Or will you prepare your kids by exposing them to these ideas first and actually preparing them for it? Here's a quote from a student. He says, "My first year of university, my philosophy professor completely tore down my Christian faith and put me on the verge of agnosticism. He made me realise that I was an ignorant Christian and knew nothing about what science says about evolution and the existence of God. Through his presentations of biased scientific information, he proved that only a fool would believe in God. I've always considered myself a strong Christian, but I've never heard such direct scientific challenges, questioning not only the existence of God, but my faith, my belief in Jesus Christ." Note that, I've always considered myself a strong Christian, and yet his faith was undermined because of this intentional attack on his faith. And of course, it's not just on university campuses. There's books attacking the Christian faith. There's the student magazines. There's articles in every single issue. We've got movies that are full of anti-Christian themes. We've got music and TV and other media. On YouTube, just type in, atheism or something. There's so much material on YouTube that these kids are watching, and it's so accessible, these attacks. So for me as a parent, I want to make sure that I'm preparing my kids for that environment. I want to expose them to some of these ideas and dismantle these ideas and show my kids how they are faulty before they get exposed to them out there. And in my line of work in running Thinking Matters, we've got a resource desk over there, and I'm often selling resources at a resource desk at an event like this. And just about every single time, I will get a parent who comes up to me and says, "Listen, my son, my daughter went off to university 2 years ago, and they were so on fire for Christ. They used to be a leader in their youth group, and now they've just claimed they're an atheist. They just don't believe anymore. Is there anything you can give me? Can you sell me a book I can send them?" And it always breaks my heart, because this happens every single event that I sell books at. Somebody will tell me this story. So we are hemorrhaging our kids. Something has to change. If we were sending our soldiers out into a war zone where the survival rate was only 40%, can you imagine the outcry? We just wouldn't do that. But it's a battlefield out there. We are sending our kids out into that battlefield, and our kids are not ready. David Riddell says, "If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got." We have to do something else. We have to do something differently. But what? What can we do? We have to recapture the young minds of our children with the truth. And I think apologetics and worldview training is an essential part of the solution. Now, it's not the only part of the solution. The solution is going to be complicated. There's going to be lots of different streams involved. So it's not just apologetics and worldview. But any solution will certainly not be less than apologetics and worldview training. We need to be able to equip them so they can articulate and defend their faith, not just what they believe, but why they believe it. We should be should we isolate and protect our kids? I would say no, we need to be inoculating our kids. Now, of course, an inoculation is where you expose the body to a small, safe amount of something really dangerous, so the body can actually respond to that and learn how to defend against it and how to respond, so that later on, if it's exposed to a large amount of this dangerous substance, there's already this response. They already know, the body already knows how to respond. In the same way, the spiritual health of our kids works in the same way. We need to expose them to small amounts so that they can learn how to respond, so that when they're out there, they can articulate and defend against these ideas. And it's on this principle that I want to introduce a 4-part strategy to equip our kids with solid apologetics and worldview training. And I want to give credit to a friend of mine, Brett Kunkel, from a ministry called Stand to Reason in the States for some of this material. And it's based on 2 separate sources. I want to explain these 2 different sources of where this 4-part strategy comes from. The first is classical education approach to learning, and the second is a study on the retention of belief and what causes belief to be retained. So the first thing is the classical education approach to learning. Raise your hands if you know what the classical education is. One? Okay. Sort of, yeah. It actually dates back to the classical Greeks and Romans, and then it was formalised. It's sort of in the Middle Ages, so we're talking it's real old. And in its simplest form, it comes in 3 stages. It's a 3-stage process of training the mind. So the first stage is what we call the grammar stage. This is early learning. This typically is children that's below the age of 10. And this is where it's just a matter of facts. Just give them facts. Give them the facts. It's the what. And we all know, the young kids, they're just like sponges. They just soak up facts. They're just constantly asking questions. They just want to learn anything you tell them they'll believe, right? So that's the first stage, is simply the what. The second stage is the why, and we call this the logic stage. This is sort of in the middle years, sort of around 8 to 10 up to about 12 or 13, where a child starts to be able to develop thinking in a much more abstract way. And they start asking a lot of why questions. So it's wanting to know the justification for the facts that you've taught them in the first stage, in order to provide a coherent picture of the world. And then the third stage is called the rhetoric stage. This comes into where they then learn how to express what they've learned. So they get to speak it, they get to write it, they get to debate about it. So those 3 stages all come together to form the mind. So in the third stage, it's things like writing and speaking, doing research, writing papers, giving speeches, debating. It's about articulating what they've come to believe is true. And my 4-part strategy for equipping kids is based on these three steps, recognising that the spiritual discipleship of our kids follows these 3 steps in much the same way. But I'm going to split the middle step, the why, into 2 stages, and I'm going to do this based on a study on the retention of beliefs by an American philosopher, Nicholas Walterstorff, long name. He did this study back in I think like the 1980s or something, where they wanted to study human behaviour on how and why people retain a belief in something, and it was done in 3 different groups. So what they did was they taught some facts to people, and then they measured how many of the group believed in those facts, and then at some stage later on they tested them again to see how many continued to believe in those beliefs. So they did it in 3 groups. The first group was just taught the what. This is it. They were just taught what to believe, and that was it. And they tested them, and you can imagine there were people who, the retention of belief fell away after some time. The majority of them abandoned that belief. The second group, they taught what to believe, and they gave some rational justification for that belief. So they taught the what and the why. And as you can imagine, this group had a much higher retention of belief than the first. The third group, though, had them by far the greatest. They were taught both what and why, and they were given some of the most common objections to that belief and why those objections don't actually make sense. So this group had the much highest retention rate, and in fact this group was found to be much more motivated to defend the original idea, even against objections they had never come across before. which is really interesting. So if I, for a moment, apply this to apologetics, you can imagine the what. Let's say Jesus rose from the dead. This is what we teach our kids. Jesus rose from the dead. There's a what. If that's all we teach our kids, they won't retain that belief so much as if we add in some why. So let's have a look at some apologetics evidence for this. Right? Some evidence for the resurrection is that many became converts after the death of Christ because they saw him alive again. So if you think about James, Jesus' brother, he did not believe in Jesus before, but he became a convert after. Now, why would you do that unless you actually saw your brother alive again? And Paul had an encounter with the risen Jesus later on and became a convert. So these are lines of evidence that would support the original claim that Jesus rose from the dead. And then the third group, if we go what and the why, the third group is the common objection. So there's an objection called the hallucination theory, which would say the apostles only thought they saw a risen Jesus, but they were actually just having hallucinations. The problem with that, though, is that hallucinations are personal and subjective. It's impossible to have the same hallucination as somebody else. And yet entire groups of people saw the risen Jesus. So this discounts this objection. So that's an example of some what, some why, and a common objection. And if we do all of those together, we are solidifying the what well beyond just telling our kids what to believe. So, with those two ideas, the classical approach to learning and the study on retention of beliefs, I want to introduce you now to this four-part strategy. And it's a merging of these two things. So the first thing is we've got to teach our kids the what. So this is what I've sort of termed as theology, the study of God. This is the study of what we believe as Christians. What is the Christian worldview? Secondly, teach the why. And this is apologetics. Let's actually give them some reasons for believing the what. And this follows the grammar stage. Sorry. I got that wrong. Part 3, let's teach them the why not. This comes from the study of retention of beliefs. Let's introduce them to some of the ideas that challenge what we believe. Let's expose them in small doses, like we're inoculating them, with some of the ideas that are out there that challenge us. And then finally, it's the application. The first three are teaching, the last one is training. Train them how to engage. This is the application. And I strongly believe the further down these four steps and strategy you go, the more we will be solidifying the beliefs of our kids in readiness for the attacks that they're going to face. The more likely that it will be that they will take ownership of their own faith, and less likely that they'll abandon their faith later. So I'm going to look at those four in a bit more depth now. So first of all, the what. This should be what is already happening in youth groups, in devotionals with parents in your church. This is what should already be happening, right? And here's some basic, this is just suggestions. Everyone has different Bible curriculum that they're teaching, but some of these are just great Christian truths. They encapsulate things, really complex ideas like the gospel, like the idea of creation and things like this. So this should be bread and butter Christianity. This should already be taught. But we have to go further than that. So in stage 2, we have to teach the why. Because too many Christians stop at this first point. And they say, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. But when you ask them why, they can't answer that question. And I think that cripples our ability to share the gospel if we can't answer that question when people say, why are you a Christian? We have to give reasons and justifications for the truths that we hold and that we live by. Now, there's a huge amount that we can cover with apologetics. There's just a tremendous amount, but one particular model that I like to use is based on what I call foundational truths, and there's certain foundational truths on which the Christian worldview rests. First of all, that truth itself exists and we can know it. Secondly, God exists Thirdly, God acts. So God acts. Miracles are possible, such as the creation of life, such as the resurrection. On top of that comes the idea that God speaks, that Scripture is accurate, that it's reliable in what it says. Then God cares. We all suffer. We all have this weightiness of living in a fallen world, but God still cares. And on top of that rests the gospel. Now, if you think about it, if you're trying to share the gospel, but somebody is really struggling because their mother just died from cancer, it's like you've got to actually talk about the fact that actually God does care. There's no point about talking about God caring if somebody denies the fact that God actually speaks or God acts. There's no point in talking about God acting or revealing His truth in Scripture if they don't even believe in God, and there's no point in trying to prove that God exists if they don't even believe in truth. So you see how this is sort of a cumulative case that you've actually got to go back, and if people deny some of these lower foundations, you've got to dismantle some of those ideas before you can sort of move on up. Now, it's just a model, it's just a general model, but I think it sort of covers a lot of the structure, a lot of the apologetics ideas that are out there that I think we need to teach. Number 3, teach the why not. And this is sort of comparative worldview, because we have to know our enemy. Now, our enemy is obviously not the people out there who believe in faulty ideas. They are victims of the enemy. Our enemy are the lies and the deceptions of the faulty worldviews that our world are constantly feeding them, that are taking them away from knowing God. So what are the competing worldviews in our culture today? Are you familiar with them? Naturalism, scientism, atheism, humanism, postmodernism, pluralism, relativism, all the isms. Are you familiar with the ideas that are behind some of these isms and how they're being promoted in our culture today? Can you explain why these are false? Now, see to it, no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world and not according to Christ. We must not be taken captive by the false ideas of the world. But how can we avoid being taken captive if we actually don't even know what those ideas are and why they're false? Now, did Jesus say, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by developing a closer emotional relationship with Jesus"? He didn't say that, did he? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. To me, this points to this need for us to understand the world and the lies and the deceptions that are out there. Because it's not a matter of if our kids are renewing their minds. They're renewing their minds. The question is, what are they renewing their minds on? Where are they getting the messages that they're believing? The worldview ideas, the cultural messages from the movies and the YouTube clips and the music and the entertainment, the social media. I mean, we have to understand all of the sources that these are coming from, because our kids are renewing their minds. And these things will take them captive by philosophy and empty deceit. And so we do need to teach them worldview. We need to teach them how to see and recognise these lies. I've got a good friend of mine who has a young teenage daughter, and he won't let her listen to a new song until she's downloaded the lyrics for that song, printed them out, and they've sat and they've discussed them. Now, he doesn't do this to filter her from the media that she wants to learn. He's doing this as a training opportunity. And what he said, he asks her questions. He'll say things like, what's the main message of the song? What does the song say about relationships? What does the song say about women and how they should be treated? He's been intentional, not about screening his daughter from these bad songs. He's not isolating her, he's inoculating her. He's getting her to think before blindly consuming this media and these messages. He's ultimately trying to train his daughter to ask the question, is this song good for my soul? Because one day he won't be there and she will need to do this for herself. She'll be making those decisions, and he wants her to be in the mindset of constantly asking the questions, is this good for my soul? Again, our kids are renewing their minds. It's just a question of what are they renewing it with. So quick 3 tips on teaching apologetics and worldview. First of all, encourage them to ask questions. Perhaps ask them the first question. Say to them, why does God exist? And watch them struggle and squirm. I mean, that's a tough question for an adult to answer. But make them struggle and to answer, because what that struggle does is it creates intellectual discomfort. And that creates an internal motivation, because it's like, oh gosh, I don't know, Daddy. Why does God exist? It gives them a motivation to want to learn how to answer these questions. Secondly, create a safe place for their doubts to be explored and answered. Make sure they know they can ask you questions, no matter how silly they are. Always invite them to challenge you with their questions and their doubts. Tell them it's okay to have doubts. It's okay to have doubts. We all have moments of doubt. We should be safe to explore that. If you shut down doubts, they will go somewhere else for answers to their questions. And finally, elevate your expectations. Kids will step up when you challenge them. I'll never forget a time, I can't remember how old I was, but I was a really small kid, and my mum was teaching my older sister some biblical concept. And I remember just overhearing it. I was in the room, but I wasn't being talked to, but I overheard this. And afterwards I went up to my mum and I asked her a question about it. And she dismissed me. She said, oh, I'm sorry, you're too young to understand. Listen, when you're a bit older, then come back and I'll explain it to you. And I went away and I accepted that, but I've never forgotten it, because I know I understood what she was teaching my sister. I did get it, but she thought I was too young to get it. And I think we always have to remember that our kids are capable of far, far more than we think they are. Finally, train to engage. This brings that last step of the classical education model, the rhetoric stage. And I think this is far more important than merely imparting knowledge to our kids. And this final stage has the greatest impact, I think, on a young adult taking ownership for their faith. First of all, it's worth highlighting the difference between teaching and training. Teaching is to cause to know something or to impart knowledge, to enrich the mind. Training means to prepare someone to master a skill, to mould habits. The first 3 steps the first 3 strategies are all about teaching. We want to teach them the what, we want to teach them the why, we want to teach them the why not. Now, we want to train them to engage. Because how much of our Christian activity is within the 4 walls of the church, is within our own youth group, our own friends, our own family, who are all Christian? Are we actually getting out there into the real world? Are we dealing with unbelievers, with broken people? This is what Alan said in his introduction talk. He talked about proximity. Let's make sure we're actually in the world. We need to get our kids off the sideline and into the game. Because we don't just want to make disciples of our kids, we want to make disciple-making disciples. Because disciple-making disciples who take the gospel of Jesus out into a broken world are much, much more resilient in their faith. But how do we do this? How do we train our kids to engage? How do we get them off the sidelines and into the game? Well, I want to introduce you to 3 tools, because there's so many different ways you can do this. The idea is to get your kids engaging with unbelievers. So the first is the easiest and the safest, and I do this. In fact, I love doing this. In fact, I'm going to do role-playing in my talk tomorrow, in the talk I'm doing tomorrow. But role-play. Get your kids to role-play as an atheist, or a relativist, or a naturalist, or a New Age spiritualist, and then get the other kids to challenge them. So get them to actually engage together. You know, we've been taught the why and the why not, and the what, the why and the why not. Now let's play with it. And the advantage of doing it in role play is that it's safe. It's perfectly safe. You can screw up and it doesn't matter. So it's a safe and fun environment where students can stretch themselves. Secondly, you can hone your ability to articulate what you believe in a way that never happens when you're just digesting information, when you're just being taught, when you're actually having to express it with someone. It helps you to see the other side. It helps you to see the perspective that an unbeliever is coming from. When you actually have to put yourself in their shoes and defend atheism, it really helps you understand their thinking in a way that you can't do without doing that. It creates intellectual discomfort, which highlights the need for further training. So when you have you're role-playing as an atheist and I'm debating you, you're defending Christianity and I'm role-playing an atheist, it makes you feel uncomfortable in a safe way because you know I'm not really an atheist, so you can have fun with it. But you don't know how much you don't know. And it's not until you get exposed to some of these ideas that you realise that you've actually got to do some more study. In fact, I like this quote, you don't know you need a belt until your pants fall down. And when you get down-trowed by your opponents in a role play, it highlights just how unprepared we actually are. And this leads to an internal motivation to go out there and study and learn and be better prepared so that when you have a real conversation with an atheist, you're actually better prepared. You're actually able to respond better. I've got a men's group. We meet. I've got a weekly prayer group. These guys come around and we meet for prayer once a week. And afterwards, we always get into deep philosophical and theological discussions and things. And every now and again, we'll say, "Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I'm going to role play, so we can wrestle with this idea." And one of us will fall into a role play character, and the rest of us will be challenging. And it's just so much fun. It is. We just come back, and every now and again, it's competitive. It's a group of guys, right? So we're trying to trip each other up. But to actually force yourself, you've got to stop and think, okay, now what would a relativist say to that? That's a really good point. And it forces you to think like an unbeliever. And it's an incredible way of opening up an awareness of the sort of people that we're dealing with. Secondly, conversational surveys. These are great tools to start conversations with unbelievers. A survey. And you basically, you could do this in the playground, you could do it on the street. You basically, you get your youth group to go out into the street with a clipboard and a survey, and they just walk up to strangers and say, "Hey, I'm doing a survey, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" And you'll get takers, and use the format, do you believe, ... why, ... So you ask questions like, do you believe in God or a higher power? Yes, no. Why? And you start to talk about it. Do you believe there is universal morality that everyone should follow? Why? Do you believe in the afterlife? Do you believe that truth exists? And if so, how can we know truth? Who do you believe Jesus was? If you could ask God one question, what would it be? These are questions designed to be incredibly open-ended. And what they do is they actually get your youth group members talking with complete strangers about weighty matters. And it opens up fascinating conversations and gets them engaging. Finally, field trips. Field trips are great ways of exposing your young people to other worldviews. This is definitely the hardest, it's the most time-consuming, but boy, it is the most rewarding way to get kids engaging. Imagine taking your youth group to an atheist meeting on campus, or into a Buddhist temple, and getting a Buddhist monk to give you a 20-minute rundown of what they believe as Buddhists, and then say, "Can we ask you questions?" Phone up the local rationalist society and say, "Hey, I've got a group of Christian students. Can we come down and hear what you believe and then ask you questions?" Do you think they're going to say no? These people are happy to present their worldview to you, to your kids. And when your students are forced to have real conversations with real people who really know what they're talking about, their learning increases exponentially. Let me read you what Brett Kunkel says. He says, after I taught about a religion like Buddhism and offering a biblical and philosophical critique of it, I would arrange a field trip to the local Buddhist temple. A monk gave us a tour, explained their basic beliefs and practices, and answered students' questions. Everything the students learnt in the classroom prior to the field trip came to life as they engaged a Buddhist monk in the flesh. The encounter was exciting, and it gave students an opportunity to get their theology and apologetics out of the classroom and into real conversation. They were forced to articulate the truth, and in doing so, they learnt that truth in a deeper and more meaningful way. Brett says the kids started off by being scared to death, but afterwards, he says, you cannot shut them up. They are so engaged. Can you imagine what it does to their motivation to learn more about reaching out into these other worldviews? There's nothing quite like a test to motivate us to study something more. Brett goes on to say, you give a kid an apologetics book and ask them to read it, and almost none of them will. But give them some experiences having real conversations with atheists, and they will stay up all night studying it. But more than that, these encounters, when you go into these places and you recognise that these are real people who hold these faulty views, it builds compassion for the lost. And it's easy to just think about this as just learning ideas, and it's easy to forget that those who believe these ideas are deceived and broken and in bondage to these faulty ideas. And it's impossible to hate someone whose story you know. And when your kids start connecting with the people who reject Christ, not just the ideas that they hold, you can't help but feel compassion for them. Christ's compassion for them is made in the image of God. Christ loves these people. And when you actually engage with them, you start to sense that love, and it just gives you a compassion for the lost. Because Jesus didn't say, follow me and I'll make you winners of arguments. He said he'll make us winners of souls, fishers of men. And souls are broken and hurting and stubborn and prideful, and they take time to respond to some of these ideas. Apologetics isn't about winning arguments, it's about being persuasive with the truth. We don't want people to accept our arguments, we want people to accept Christ. And getting our kids engaging with the lost, with those who are deceived, builds compassion, and that's so important. But there's two important concepts of these field trips. The debrief. You must debrief them. You don't just obviously take them into a Buddhist temple and let them learn all about Buddhism and then just send them on their way. You then take them back into a classroom type environment, and then you say, so what did you learn? What did you think? What were you challenged by? What questions and doubts do you now have that you didn't have before? And you debrief them, and you make sure that you've got good resources available to you so that you can critique this worldview they've been exposed to. This is part of you. This is like your immune system responding to that exposure to a dangerous substance. So you have to spend time debriefing, because they can be quite shaken if they hear somebody who's really compelling, giving a powerful apologetic, if you will, for atheism or for some of these ideas. So you have to debrief them. And secondly, you have to pray. Man, you have to cover this stuff in prayer, because your students have to be humbled by such an experience, and prayer is an important part of that. Like I said, these people aren't the enemy. They're lost souls who have been deceived by the empty philosophies according to the traditions of man. And we've got to allow our hearts to be broken by that. So you and your students need to pray for compassion for the people that you're going out and talking to. And if you cover this exercise in prayer, you will see your kids become so much more confident and passionate and humble and motivated as defenders of the faith. And of course, these field trips are also an opportunity for you to embody what we believe as Christ. And when we're sharing with others, we are showing love and compassion. We are modelling grace and dignity and respect. Even though you disagree with these people and their ideas, you see how destructive their ideas are. You're still loving them as an individual. You can model how it's not about arguments, it's not about proving yourself right, it's about building relationship and understanding and trying to respond to these people. You can model gracious intellectual conversation. You can model curiosity about the world and people who believe things other than us. You can model a confidence in the fact that we actually have good answers to even the toughest questions and challenges that we might face. And of course, you can model that we aren't afraid of the arguments and ideas that come against what we believe and hold dear. Because we have the truth on our side. And with the truth on our side, we can stand confidently in the face of any objection, even the most hostile and skilled of intellectual challenges. So let me close now by simply saying, first of all, let me close with this quote from an atheist professor when he talks about targeting young Christians when they enter university. Richard Rorty. He says, "We try to arrange things so that students who enter as bigoted, homophobic, religious fundamentalists will leave college with views more like our own. So we're going to go right on trying to discredit you in the eyes of your children, trying to strip your fundamentalist religious community of dignity, trying to make your views seem silly rather than discussable." They are being intentional. Are we being intentional? Because the church is hemorrhaging our young people. And they are walking away from the only truth that will save them from their sin. And they are destined to an eternity apart from God. We have to play our part in preventing this and raising up the next generation as faithful followers of Christ. Let's train our young people to know that Christianity is true and that it can be known to be true. Let's train them to graciously and lovingly defend Christianity. Let me close with this quote that US Navy SEALs use as part of their training. Actually dates back to some ancient Chinese proverb, and I really like it. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. You like it? The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. Because we know it's a battleground out there. And our young people are facing incredible brokenness if they don't have the truth of Christ. So let's make them sweat in training and give them a strong, battle-hardened armour. So no matter where they go in life, they will be prepared to withstand the attacks that they're going to face. Let's make them sweat in training so they don't have to bleed on the battlefield. And they can become effective witnesses for Jesus Christ until the end of the age.
An evangelism conference for New Zealand. Get inspired, be equipped, engage confidence, reaching your world one conversation at a time.